Hi, welcome to our NCSC Project Drawdown 2021 panel, RISAs, Climate Hubs, and CASCs, Federal Coordination Across the Regional Networks. My name is Ariela Zycherman, and I'm a Program Manager at the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration's Regional Integrated Sciences and Assessments Program, also known as RISA. I'm here with my colleagues from NOAA, the Department of Interior's Climate Adaptation Science Centers, and the Department of Agriculture's Climate Hubs, to discuss our 3 regional climate networks working towards the shared goal of building resilience to a changing climate across the US and its territories. There are many different regional climate networks across the government. Some focus on data and forecasting and others on early warnings. But what brings RISA, the climate hubs, and the CASCs together, and also apart from the others, is their unique approach to making science both usable and actionable to decision makers, and processes of engagement and outreach that ensure science is relevant at the local level. Yet despite these similarities, the networks are also different, catering to a variety of stakeholders, creating different types of tools and products, and addressing a variety of national needs. We coordinate across the 3 networks at both a federal level and at a regional level to ensure that we leverage opportunities to address the growing demands for climate information that can support effective adaptation across sectors. Next slide. Today, Janet Cushings from the CASCs, Rachel Steele from the Climate Hubs, and Chelsea Combest-Friedman from RISA will give a brief overview of their networks, highlighting specific network relevant projects, as well as the examples of collaboratory projects across networks. But first, I'll introduce you to our ongoing theory of change work, where we're working at a federal level to identify our shared interests as well as our differences in order to better coordinate our approaches to science to action. Next slide. So what is a theory of change and why are we doing it? A theory of change is a collaboratory process to identify a shared desired goal and then identify how it can be achieved. A theory of change allows us to understand what the other agencies are doing, allows us to see where we can share resources, allows us to coordinate activities and opportunities, allows us to identify potential partnerships, allows us to bridge areas of expertise, allows us to recognize differences, and allows us to consider new approaches to meet greater goals together. Next slide. The first step in the process is to define the change you want to happen. Together, we identified a shared goal for the network. Our desired question is resilience through informed decision making. And what this means to us is informed decision makers will understand, plan for, and respond to a changing climate condition. Next slide. The second step in a theory of change is to identify the conditions that are necessary in order for change to happen. And we identified together 5 conditions that need to happen in order to achieve the shared goal. And that's capacity to act, adaptable governance, sufficient resources, motivated decision makers or a public, and actionable knowledge. And here you can see the beginnings of our conditions map, what influences what and how. It's still a work in process, but what's key here is that when we look closer into each of these conditions, we find that their meaning is quite different across the networks. What that means is, as we move forward, the mechanisms for ensuring that these conditions exist will also be different, imploring us to continue to work together to ensure success for the shared goal. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Janet to introduce us to what it means for the CASCs. Next slide.
Thank you, Ariela. Hi, my name is Janet Cushing, and I am with the National Climate Adaptation Science Center at USGS. And it's my pleasure to join my colleagues in this symposium, albeit in a virtual setting. And while I wish I could make these presentations in person, I'm glad we could use technology to still have a dialogue about partnering on effective management of our natural and cultural resources. Next slide. So a little bit about the CASCs, and I'll say CASCs for short. So our mission is to deliver science to help fish, wildlife, water, land, and the people who manage them adapt to a changing climate. Our stakeholders are natural and cultural resources, and we really work very closely with them in a co-production manner to help inform their management decisions. Our science planning involves engaging regional and national stakeholders to identify their science needs and we develop annual plans at each regional CASC to try and develop a science portfolio. Next slide, please. Our Climate Adaptation Science Center network spans the U.S. all the way from the U.S. affiliated Pacific Islands and Hawaii out in the west, all the way across to the East Coast and the Caribbean, including Puerto Rico and U.S. Virgin Islands. The way we work is that we have federal university partnerships, so each of our regional CASCs is hosted by a university, and there are a series of academic partners that make up each consortium. So science plans are developed at the regional level, and then at the national level, we coordinate national science priorities and work with the regional CASCs to develop syntheses and other broad science products. We also deal with national level partnership engagement like we have right here in the symposium. And we also provide the support for data management and general administration and communication needs. Next slide, please. So I'm going to talk about two different projects. They're both drought related, but they're slightly different here. And so the first one is this one on Wind River Indian Reservation. This project was completed a couple of years ago and really provides a good example of the unique role that the CASCs play in the climate adaptation community. The Wind River Indian Reservation is in west central Wyoming, and it's home to the Eastern Shoshone and Northern Arapaho tribes. And they depend on water from the streams that feed into the Wind River. In recent years, however, their livelihoods and cultural activities have been impacted from frequent severe droughts. Therefore, the scientists with our North Central Climate Adaptation Science Center, along with the partners that you see listed on the slide, assessed how drought affects the reservation, integrating social, ecological, hydrological, and climate sciences with local knowledge. The findings helped inform the creation of a climate monitoring system and a drought management plan, which are all being supported with additional technical and financial support from the High Plains Regional Climate Center and NOAA's National Integrated Drought Information System. The drought plan integrates climate science with hydrologic, social, and ecological vulnerabilities and risks, and identifies response capacities and strategies to support the tribal water code and related resources management. This plan, along with the decision dashboard, and you see a picture snapshot of that on the slide, was designed to help the tribes ensure that their agricultural and other societal needs are met during times of drought. And as part of this project, the tribal water managers and the public were engaged in educational activities related to water resources and drought preparedness through joint activities with the Wyoming Experimental Program to stimulate competitive research to build the tribe's ability to respond to future drought events. Additionally, the Western Water Assessment at the University of Colorado Boulder and the project team evaluated team processes and outputs to document lessons learned from the collaborative process that we had to support the transfer of knowledge to other tribes and non-tribal entities in the region. Next slide. So this is another example, and this is important because drought doesn't just happen out west, it also happens out east, and in this particular example in the US Caribbean. So since the 1950s, the US Caribbean has experienced at least 7 major droughts. A severe drought that occurred between 2014 and 2016 resulted in water rationing for 1.2 million people and incurred over 14 million US dollars in agricultural losses. That's huge. Temperatures and seasonal rainfall patterns in the US Caribbean are changing and conditions are projected to become even more variable in the future. Over the past 70 years, temperatures have increased by about 2.5 degrees Fahrenheit in Puerto Rico, and climate models project about anywhere from 1.5 to about 4 degrees Fahrenheit increase in average temperatures for the US Caribbean by 2050. Some parts of the Caribbean might experience longer dry seasons and shorter and wet seasons. So to get a better handle on how drought was affecting multiple sectors, the Southeast and National Climate Adaptation Science Centers, or CASCs, partnered with the USDA Caribbean Climate Hub to hold a 2-day workshop at the International Institute of Tropical Forestry in San Juan, Puerto Rico. This workshop brought together about 50 scientists and managers from agriculture, natural resources, and the water supply sectors from Puerto Rico, the US Virgin Islands, as well as the US mainland. So the participants worked together in these 2 days to identify a few things. One, first off, lessons learned from past drought experiences, such as the severe 2015 drought. Second, similarities and differences in terms of the impacts of drought on agriculture, ecosystems, and water supply sectors. The availability of data and information that can be used for drought monitoring, as well as information gaps. And finally, the potential future drought scenarios in the region and what those conditions could mean for managers. So this was truly a great partnering effort. And in addition to producing 2-page fact sheets on different systems, one of the really neat outcomes, and it wasn't planned at the very beginning, but it came out, is the collection of videotaped oral histories of some of the workshop participants. The Southeast CASC interviewed 9 workshop participants, and the 45 to 60-minute oral narratives provide not only lessons from the past, but also possible solutions to help with future resiliency. All of the recordings and their transcripts are held in the Digital Library of the Caribbean, which is a cooperative digital library for resources from and about the Caribbean and Circum-Caribbean. Next slide. And that's all I have. My contact information is there, and I look forward to having a dialogue in virtual person. Thank you.
Thank you, Janet, and thank you, Ariela. I just will take a few minutes to talk about just the wealth of great partnership that we've had with the team here. And I just want to say, with the Climate Hubs network at USDA, we're the youngest of the networks, and we've really benefited from the other climate networks partnership, both at the NOAA RISAs and the DOI's Climate Adaptation Science Center. As you can see from what Janet talked about, some of the really rich examples of partnership that we've benefited from as we all work together towards this really difficult problem of climate change and how it affects our various stakeholders and how it affects our various mission areas. So I'm going to talk to you today briefly about the USDA Climate Hubs. My name is Rachel Steele. I'm the National Climate Hub lead here at USDA. I have the benefit of working with a really tremendous team of folks across USDA. The hubs were established in 2014 to really connect the USDA research agencies to what we call our program agencies. And what that means to someone on the outside is really, we have all these agencies and all these staff at the county level through our Natural Resources Conservation Service, Farm Service Agency, Risk Management Agency. USDA is a very broad footprint, and we have to reach all of our stakeholders, our working land managers, at where they are at the county level. So as those program agencies implement the Farm Bill, we want to make sure that the science from climate data, climate research that USDA and other agencies are doing is reaching those staff at the regional level in a way that's easy for them to understand and interpret, so that our working land managers can access resources or can access tools or information that they need to manage their land in a way that's more resilient to a changing climate. And as Janet demonstrated in a couple of those examples, you know, that's sometimes through dashboards, that's sometimes through decision support tools, sometimes that's through an infographic or a brochure or an NRCS agent saying, oh, well, I have an overlay of climate and this is what it looks like in the next 30 years for your land. Here's some resources, here's some options for you to consider implementing on your land that would make you more resilient. So that's our mission, is really to connect that science-based information and make it region specific and make it easy to understand so that folks can use it to make decisions that support climate resilience on their land. And we've really focused a lot on this co-production process. So co-production really just means we aren't operating from the framework where we think, you know, we have all this great information, we have all this great research, why don't you just take it, use it? We're really trying to make sure that we're answering questions that people need. And so in this process, you can see some of our stakeholders and our products, you know, as we go through it. So our primary stakeholders, like I said before, is really our USDA program agencies, our folks that have the boots on the ground at the county level. And then we start to expand out to our secondary stakeholders and partners. Our partners, our key partners, are the folks on the phone right now, the NOAA RISAs, the CASCs, those university extension folks that are out there every day. You know, they're at the regional level. We have on a second level stakeholder group those states, private sector companies, nonprofits, NGOs, and then ultimately we're all working to help our working land managers at USDA to ensure that they have what they need to manage their land in a climate resilient way. And so as we go through that process, we have to continue to ask ourselves and them and our stakeholders, are we answering the right questions? Or is the data, are the data demonstrating what you're seeing on the ground? Are we asking the right question? Is there a tool that you have that you wish did something else? And so, you know, it's a continual process of evaluation, identifying partners, and co-developing solutions to these really difficult challenges that folks are managing all over the country. And so as we work through that process, the climate hubs have regions. And so there's 10 regions across the country for the climate hubs. And, you know, it's of course a challenge in that each federal network has different regions, but we all are focused on making sure that the regions are driving the question. And so half of our regions are run by our Agriculture Research Service, half are run by our U.S. Forest Service, but we want to make sure that we have a unified front and a unified message when it comes to communicating the science, communicating back to the research agencies what the regional needs are. And so you can see our 10 regions have a number of different products that they've developed. And I won't go into all of them, but I put this on just to demonstrate that each region has a unique challenges when it comes to climate change. You know, either drought in the plains, like Janet mentioned, and the Caribbean, or is it inundated flooding or extreme events like Hurricane Harvey in Texas? Are we dealing with, you know, early spring impacts in the northern forest region, or are we dealing with water management in the Southwest? And can we develop tools to deal with post-fire response? So I just wanted to put this up to demonstrate that each region, each of our 10 regions, has unique challenges and unique needs that we need to address as we work together through our networks. A quick example of some of the tools that we've developed. We have a GrassCast tool that our Northern Plains Climate Hub has developed. This tool helps farmers and ranchers and land managers project the amount of forage or grass that's going to be growing on their land using NOAA seasonal forecasts. And this has been something that's really grown in popularity. Our Natural Resources Conservation Service is using it to help land managers anticipate how many head of cattle can I put on this land and not overgraze? Or do I need to sell? Or can I buy some more stockers? Is there going to be enough forage on land for them to accommodate more cattle? So this GrassCast tool is a really neat conglomeration of NOAA data and agriculture research data and National Drought Mitigation Center and others to put together something that we heard was a need from our stakeholders. The other process or the other tool that we have is the adaptation workbook that we're trying to make region specific. It's more of a process, an adaptive management process to get farmers and ranchers and foresters thinking about what their land's going to look like in 30 years so that they can plan accordingly, and developing menus of options for them to consider to really harden their land to the coming changes with climate change. And then finally, the Ag Risk Viewer. It's something that we've taken the data from our risk management agency, the cause of loss, and we've identified some trends with climate change and really helping our program agencies anticipate what the future will look like and helping them plan accordingly. And I won't go into a ton of detail. I know I'm running short on time, but just a couple examples of working with our partners here on the phone. We have worked with all of our RISA and CASC partners across the country, and I'm really proud of that. Our Northwest Hub has worked with the Climate Adaptation Science Center in Alaska to do a drought workshop. So you don't think about drought sometimes in Alaska like you don't think about it in the Caribbean, but this was something that really resonated. We had 90 participants, folks from forestry, fisheries, municipalities, and universities, talking about drought and drought metrics to help develop some metrics for anticipating drought. Janet talked about our Northern Plains collaboration, but we really value our partnership with these other networks because it helps us kind of elevate the task and elevate the role and get everyone on the same page and speaking from the same sheet of music. And that has been just a tremendous asset to the Climate Hubs program. And I look forward to continuing our partnership with these networks in the future. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Rachel and Janet and Ariela. As Ariela mentioned, I'm Chelsea Combest Friedman. I currently lead the third network we're talking about today, the RISA network. And RISAs have been around for the longest, I believe. We've been around since the mid-90s, but have evolved a lot over that time. You're seeing on the slide here the great team that works on RISA, Caitlin Simpson, Ariela, who you've met, and Sean Bath. And we're located in NOAA's Climate Program Office in the Climate and Societal Interactions Division. Next slide, please. So what is the RISA network? It's a network of place-based interdisciplinary teams that are made up of researchers and engagement specialists. And the overall goal is to really build the capacity of decision makers to plan and prepare for climate variability and change. And we think about that capacity building in three ways: building the knowledge, the expertise, and the ability of those decision makers to plan and prepare. And as I mentioned, the network's been around for quite a while. And of course, the adaptation landscape has changed during that time quite a bit. But sort of central to the RISA ethos and model are some core components that haven't changed that much. And I think you'll have heard about a few of those in the other presentations, which hopefully is a testament to the success of this across multiple networks. One is that it's a very bottom-up program. The topics and the issues that are worked on through this network are derived based on regional relevance. And there's what I mentioned, these place-based teams that local experts are working on these issues. So it's not, necessarily researchers from the East working on issues of the West. These are people who live and are part of the communities in which they're working. The second is integrated scientific approaches. So we talked, and maybe I'll combine the third in there, knowledge to action partnerships. We've talked quite a bit about sort of this boundary space between science and decision making. You could imagine sort of the connection between emerging wildfire science, just as an example, and sort of all the host of decisions that people need to make in terms of planning and acting, responding to wildfire risk itself. So RISAs really try to stay in that space that looks across the science domain and the decision-making, policy-making, planning, management domain. And the fourth is really building what we think of as sort of the human infrastructure for this, a human network of resilience researchers and adaptation science specialists. Next slide, please. So where do we work? We're currently in 11 regions across the US. You've seen a number of different maps put up today. Ours is the one that is not across the entire country yet. We hope to be there one day. Most of our regions stay at about the 2 to 3 state max, and we found that to be sort of the most effective geographic domain to try to cover with the resources that the teams have at this point in time. We often get the question sort of, why are we in the certain places that we are? And there are a couple answers to that question. We started in the mid-90s really looking at sort of how could we experiment with the utility, the usability of climate information at a regional scale. And this was the time when a lot of the regional like ENSO forecasting was becoming more sophisticated. And so many of the places we initially went into were where we saw strong ENSO signals, for example. Over time, that's changed to a competitive structure. So now the regions are competed on a 5-year cycle. And when there are sufficient resources, we try to expand into a new region on that same cycle. We're currently in around 31 US states and over 400 communities. So although there's a big gap in the middle, there's still a lot of territory being covered. Next slide, please. So we work, if I'm going to overgeneralize, in sort of 3 buckets. The first is sort of the applied science questions that help move the field forward and help decision-making sort of at large, but are not necessarily collaborative with one particular decision maker. So as an example, there was some work done on heat and aviation, which supports a number of supports the airline industry, but wasn't necessarily done in sort of an iterative, collaborative way. So that's sort of the credible cutting edge decision relevant research that sort of helps move the field forward for adaptation. The second bucket is more of that iterative, collaborative, co-production, we've heard that word, processes to combine research and engagement, and I'll give you an example of that in a bit. And then the third bucket is training and awareness building. And we mean they're both sort of training the next generation of adaptation and resilience professionals, but also really communicating to the public and a number of different sectors about climate change and how that is impacting current sectors, current topics. And maybe I'm not sure that I have an example for you in the slide, but we can talk about some of those examples if you'd like in the discussion. Next slide, please. So some of the RISA work is done at a regional scale and some of it's done at a more local scale. This is one example of where we're working at really across a region. The Pacific Northwest Climate Toolbox is a sophisticated online suite of tools that supports really a number of users. It's used by cities, state agencies, state climate offices, and a number of others to help bring weather and climate information into decision-making and build resilience. The Washington Department of Ecology talks about this as being like a Facebook tool to him. So something that people kind of go to on a regular basis. Next slide, please. And this is a more local example of what I mentioned earlier, is that sort of co-production, collaborative research and engagement approach. This is an example from our Northeast team, and they put some RISA staff actually in the department, the New York City Department of Health and Mental Hygiene, and together those two entities co-produced a social vulnerability heat index that has been used by the mayor's office as they've started up their heat mitigation policy efforts. And it's also been used to target the most vulnerable populations within New York City as they're considering how to mitigate for heat. Next slide, please. And then I just wanted to end with one example that looks across the networks as others have done. This particular example is actually work that's going on across the West to help understand the resilience of rangeland and ranching systems. The CLIMAS RISA, which is our Southwest RISA, is conducting the research on the human dimensions of ranching. And then they're working very collaboratively with the USDA Northern Plains Climate Hub, which has been really integral to some of the field work that's happened in this project, and the Southwest Hub that has been really integral to actually getting a lot of this information through outreach to their stakeholder networks. And I think that is it for me. So maybe we're handing it back to Ariela.
So that concludes our recorded portion of our concurrent session, but we're really looking forward to talking with you live on Tuesday, January 5th from 12 to 12:30. So bring your questions and we're happy to talk. Bye.